In the Hawaiian night sky, where the wind is calm and the stars are as thick as sand, a telescope accidentally captured a moment that made the entire scientific world pause. Not because of the brightness, but because in the darkness between the stars, one object, seemingly alone, was not traveling alone. Before we begin, if you love gentle science stories like this, subscribe to the channel to explore more mysteries of the universe with me. A small click, but it is the way for you not to miss any of the wonders that await you. The latest observations from the Gemini North Observatory in Hawaii have just brought a discovery that makes the mystery of the Three-Eye Atlas deeper than ever. Data shows that this interstellar object may not be alone in its journey. It appears that many smaller objects are moving in parallel, each one keeping a stable orbit, strangely following the main celestial body. Those bright spots are not an illusion, nor a lens error. They are separate, clearly confirmed light sources floating together in the interstellar space. As scientists, we must always be cautious. All the usual possibilities need to be tested before a conclusion can be reached. Are these objects simply fragments, broken off as the sun's heat increases during their approach? That's entirely possible. But then, there's something that puzzles researchers. If this were truly fragmentation, we should have seen flying debris, long dust trails, irregular rotations. But what we see is different. They move steadily, in order, as if guided by an invisible hand. Around the world, amateur astronomers are beginning to confirm the same thing. Stephen Burns posted a time-lapse video capturing small points of light, moving in tandem with the Three-Eye Atlas. A German observer, nicknamed Night Monkey, discovered several separate orbits, all of which maintained astonishing accuracy relative to the main body. Alexander Flume, another researcher, discovered another strange detail in his footage. At the 30-second mark, a blue flash briefly appeared, radiating a faint light, clearly separate from the main body, and that, certainly not a fault of the camera. The blue color opened up another mystery. Usually, comets are blue because they contain dicarbon molecules, also known as C2, which glow in the sun's ultraviolet light. But spectral data from the Very Large Telescope in Chile showed that Three-Eye Atlas was virtually devoid of these carbon chains. Comets, by their very nature, are dirty snowballs, are 10-9 collections of loosely bound ice and dust. They break apart when subjected to heat or gravity. A hollow comet, traveling at over 100,000 miles per hour, would have long since disintegrated because of its unstable structure. Yet, Three-Eye Atlas is still intact. It even survived a coronal mass ejection this month, a barrage of plasma from the sun that would have shattered any natural object. There is something in its internal structure that makes it resistant to such destruction. It seems to defy the laws of thermodynamics that we have believed for centuries. And when we think about it, another possibility begins to emerge. What if its hollowness is not accidental, but the result of a deliberate design? If this is a manufactured object, rather than a natural formation, the hollowing makes obvious technical sense. It reduces the overall mass, while protecting the internal structures from radiation and impacts. A hollow design also helps the object maintain stability while rotating, something that natural comets rarely do. And if the materials are exotic, even outside our periodic table, that could explain why its gravity is much weaker than expected. Of course, this is not definitive evidence for the hypothesis of artificial origin, but it is a whisper from the cosmos, suggesting that the line between natural and artificial may not be as clear as we think. If you're still listening, leave a comment. Let me know you're as curious about 3i Atlas's journey as I am. NASA's Swift Observatory has also added another puzzling detail. 3i Atlas is spewing water vapor at a distance where most other comets remain dormant. Measurements show it is spewing nearly 40 kilograms of water per second, while still about 3 astronomical units from the Sunday. Comets typically only begin spewing water vapor when they get very close to the sun's heat source. So why is this visitor active so early? And why is the spewing rate so strangely consistent? The answer may lie in its internal structure, perhaps hollow, or perhaps a complex porous network that transmits and coordinates energy in ways that science has never seen before. Meanwhile, Gemini images continue to show many small objects moving in unison, as if guided by some invisible principle that humans do not yet understand. If they are just natural debris, it is amazing that they can be so stable. But if not, if they are separate entities moving with purpose, then we are witnessing something that goes beyond our current understanding of interstellar dynamics. And then, the most vexing question of all arises. If the accompanying objects are indeed companions of 3i Atlas, could they be probes? Are we observing a fleet of spacecraft moving purposefully through the solar system with a purpose that humans cannot yet understand? As a physicist, my instinct is to resist and sensationalist theories, but the history of science reminds us that Galileo was forced to ignore the moons of Jupiter because the notion at the time was that it was impossible. Throughout human history, when faced with the unknown, our first reaction is denial. And the second, later, reaction is profound amazement. Now, we are in the middle of those two reactions, between disbelief and amazement. Meanwhile, the silence from official agencies continues. NASA, the European Space Agency, and even China's Tianwen mission all possess instruments that could have observed 3i Atlas in detail during their recent close approach to Mars. But until now, no one has said a word. When the bright spots appeared for the third time in the data stream, the Gemini North team began to doubt their own instruments. They couldn't believe what they saw, because in astronomy, every strange discovery must overcome something more severe than the universe itself, the observer's own skepticism. They changed every parameter. Exposure time changed, view angle reversed, spectral range expanded. Even the denoising software was reset from scratch. But the result was the same. The bright spots, still in formation, still moving parallel to 3i Atlas. No deviation, no blur, as if they had not been affected by any change. They turned off the secondary camera, used the backup sensor, and even tried rotating the entire field of view 180 degrees. If it was the lens's fault, the bright spots should have reversed positions. But no, they remained aligned with the main body, drifting with it like tiny satellites, without leaving a pixel. At that moment, no one in the room said anything. Because if it wasn't an optical error, and if it wasn't background noise, then what was left could only be a real phenomenon. The data began to defy the laws that had been considered certain. What had seemed random now seemed to carry the signs of intention. One of the observers wrote in the technical report that night, "We cannot rule out the possibility of organized movement. The secondary bodies are maintaining their relative positions with an error of less than 0.2 arc seconds during the 6 hours of observation." That number so small it was absurd, a stability that no natural mechanism could maintain. If it's not noise, if it's not debris, then there's only one possibility: they know where they're going. And perhaps they know we're watching them. The initial suspicions gradually turned into a series of verifications. The data from Gemini North were sent to observatories in Europe and North America. When the teams in Germany, the UK, and the US opened the images, the results were a perfect match. Every location, every instrument, every angle was different, but they all saw the same thing: small points of light moving parallel to 3I Atlas. There was no way to call it a coincidence. The repetition over many nights, at many different latitudes, made the anomaly real, like an echo of the same sound. Heard on many sides of the world, it made everyone stop and listen. From then on, the phrase "steady formation" appeared in internal reports. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew it in their hearts. Something was operating in an organized way, and when a phenomenon begins to repeat itself in the same pattern, it is no longer a doubt. It has become a new form of data, something that science must acknowledge, even if it cannot explain. That night, on the science bulletin boards, 3I Atlas was officially marked with the following small text: "Interstellar object with unusual orbital behavior." A short description, but enough to open a new chapter in the history of space observation, where humans were first confronted with the possibility that, out there, in the darkness of the universe, something was operating on its own terms. As observatories simultaneously confirmed the phenomenon, every natural hypothesis began to be challenged. If the bright spots were debris, they would have scattered because of differences in velocity and solar radiation. If they were natural satellites, they would have revolved around a common center of mass. But 3I Atlas was too small to hold that. The more scientists observed, the more they realized its formation followed no known pattern. There was no closed orbit, there was no gravitational pull, and there was no sign of disintegration. They kept regular distances, flying in near perfect order, as if an invisible system were maintaining each position. At Harvard, a physicist wrote in an analysis, "If nature produces such precision, then the definition of the word nature needs to be rewritten." What puzzled them was not the image, but the degree of order in the motion, because in the universe, chaos is the norm. Order that's strange. And if there's order, there's mechanism. If there's mechanism, there's design. From that moment on, every scientific meeting about 3i Atlas began with the same question and ended with the same question. What's keeping them in formation? All physical models failed. Scientists turned to the last thing they could trust: mathematics. If the universe couldn't be explained by mechanics, let's see if it could be explained by probability. At the Harvard Institute of Astronomy, a team used Monte Carlo simulations to calculate the likelihood of this happening. Assume that the points of light were natural debris flying in the same direction by chance. The result, the probability that 7 small objects would stay at a constant distance, at the same speed, in the same direction for more than 6 hours, was 1 in 100 million. A number so small that, if the event were to happen just one more time, the entire random model would collapse. A mathematician in the team said, half-jokingly, if this were random, then random would have graduated as a control engineer. The remark spread throughout the research community because it reflected the mood of the moment, a feeling of surprise and fear. Mathematics doesn't lie, but when the numbers start pointing to the absurd, reason itself is called into question. 3i Atlas, which was just a bright spot, suddenly became a test of how humans understand the probability of order. If the probability of a phenomenon is 0.000001%, but the phenomenon still occurs, then perhaps we're not talking about randomness anymore. And so, silence began to spread throughout the mathematical community. A silence not for lack of words, but because there were no calculations simple enough to express it. Space rarely gives us the chance to test our beliefs, but sometimes it provides the perfect test. 3 days after Gemini North's observations, the sun erupted in a massive coronal mass ejection, a powerful electromagnetic storm that rippled across the solar system, powerful enough to disrupt radio waves on Earth, and powerful enough to rip apart any fragile objects floating in space. When scientists received the CME warning, they knew 3i Atlas would pass right through the impact zone. If the formation was just natural debris, the solar wind would break it apart in an instant. A natural event, an experiment that didn't require human intervention. The observatories shifted their sights. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. The solar plasma stream swept through the area, and as new images were downloaded, everyone fell silent. The 3i Atlas formation remains intact. The spots do not disintegrate, they just shift slightly and then return to their original positions, as if regulated by an invisible stabilizing mechanism. That would not be possible if these were just rocks and ice. No natural object can maintain order when swept by a plasma storm. But here, order not only survives, it restores itself. An ESA expert notes in the report, if 3i Atlas is random, then the sun has just demonstrated that randomness can protect itself. Science cannot yet call it technology, but everyone understands. A structure that can re-establish itself after disturbances is a balanced system. And a balanced system is something that no longer belongs to nature. After 3I Atlas weathered the solar storm and remained in formation, the atmosphere in the astronomy community became strange. No one spoke of noise or randomness anymore. Those words seemed outdated. Scientific conferences began to become quieter, not because there was nothing to say, but because people were afraid of what they would have to admit. Once the data had denied randomness, there were only two options. Either we were misunderstanding nature, or we had just touched something that was no longer purely natural. A professor at Cambridge said in a closed-door discussion, "Science is seeing its own limits, and when the limits become clear, fear begins to creep into the numbers." Questions that seemed to exist only in philosophy now appeared right in the telescope control room. Is the universe responding to human observation? Does 3I Atlas know it's being watched? No one has proof, but no one dares to deny it either. Science, accustomed to certainty, must now learn to shut up and listen, because sometimes data doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be accepted. If you're listening, try asking yourself this question: do humans really understand what they're seeing out there? And if you want to continue on this journey, please subscribe and drop a like. And join me in the next part, where we'll see that 3I Atlas isn't just a phenomenon, but maybe a sign. From the blurry photos on Mauna Kea, 3I Atlas moved out of the realm of scientific doubt and into a region where language began to fail. Observatories around the world agreed on a single description in the official report: orbital organization, a neutral, cautious phrase, but one that everyone who read it understood. It meant something unprecedented. From that moment, nothing was the same. 3I Atlas was no longer a drifting object, but a structure being observed. Some called it an interstellar formation. Others, more reserved, simply called it a stable, unnatural system. Science news reports began to use the word turning point, not just because of the strangeness of the phenomenon, but because of how people reacted to it. A subtle but profound shift, when curiosity and fear begin to mingle. At Harvard, Avi Loeb was asked in a closed-door interview, "Do you believe this is a man-made structure?" He just smiled. "I don't. I'm just following where the data leads me." That answer went viral on the scientific scene, not because it asserted anything, but because it felt like a door was opening. And with 3I Atlas, that door may not just be opening on the side of science, but also on the side of consciousness. If you're listening, leave a comment below. What do you think is keeping 3I Atlas and its companions in such perfect formation? Is it chance, or is it something beyond what we know? When the final images of 3I Atlas from Gemini North were analyzed, the debate began to take a different turn. No one asked, "Is this real?" but "How real is it?" At the Max Planck Institute in Germany, a team of physicists and astronomers initiated the first data project to compile all observations of 3I Atlas. They called it the Atlas of Anomalous Motion. 3I Atlas is in the center of the graph, surrounded by hundreds of small bright points, representing companion objects recorded over several nights of observations. When the data from Gemini, Subaru, and VLT were combined, a strange pattern emerged, like an expanding network with a nearly symmetrical structure around the main orbit. No one called it a system, but in technical reports, the word organization began to appear more and more. At NASA, another team simulated the natural possibilities of this phenomenon. The results showed that For small objects to maintain such a stable formation, they must interact through an unknown form of force, not gravitational, not electromagnetic. That left the researchers even more confused, because if it wasn't one of the two fundamental forces, then there were only two options left: either an undocumented physical phenomenon or the result of artificial control. Both of them silenced them. From then on, 3I Atlas was no longer a solitary object, but the center of a map of suspicion. A map that, with each update, the line between natural and artificial was blurred a little more. For if the universe can create such a sophisticated order, then perhaps humans still understand too little about how space arranges itself. Before 3I Atlas, humanity had encountered two interstellar visitors, Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. On both occasions, the universe seemed to open a small window, allowing humans a glimpse beyond its borders. Oumuamua was the first to be discovered, a long, flat object, moving at a speed too fast to belong to the solar system. It had no tail, no gas, but it accelerated as it left the sun's orbit, a behavior that many suspected was controlled. But before it could be proven, it disappeared into deep space, leaving behind a trail of unfinished data and endless debate. 2 years later, Borisov appeared. Quite the opposite. A classic comet, bright, vaporizing, and behaving according to every known law of physics. It became an example of how nature still rules in most cosmic phenomena. But with 3I Atlas, everything changed. It had nothing like Oumuamua, no long, flat, unusually reflective features. It also had nothing like Borisov, no tail, no gas, no orbital glow. Instead, it was a complex and ordered, structured movement that seemed to be maintained by some principle. If Oumuamua was the first knock on the door, Borisov was the reassuring everything is normal, then 3I Atlas was the question without an answer. In the scientific community, people began to call this phenomenon the paradigm break, a moment when everything that had been used to describe the universe suddenly stopped being enough. All familiar hypotheses were erased, and before them was only a data void. With Oumuamua, people were skeptical. With Borisov, people were reassured. But with 3I Atlas, people began to listen, not with their eyes, but with the feeling that out there, something was actively present, and its appearance could no longer be considered random. After the Gemini North data were released internally, other observatories began to point their lenses at the same coordinates. Night after night, from Germany, England, Japan, Chile, they all saw the same thing. 3I Atlas was still flying, and the bright points were still flying with it. Coincidence became evidence. From different mountains, different lenses, the world saw the same formation keeping order. In space with nothing to keep that order, the data from Europe matched the images from North America down to the arcsecond. No significant difference in speed, no change in direction. A consistent movement, confirmed by thousands of kilometers of independent observations. Experts began to call this phenomenon synchronous drift, movement in phase, a phenomenon that is almost impossible without some kind of coordination, or at least an extremely precise energy reaction mechanism. The question is no longer, is it real? But why is it seen everywhere on Earth? In physics, every movement carries information, a wobble, a change in direction, a change in speed. All of it can be read as text, if one is patient enough to decipher it. And with 3I Atlas, motion is the only thing humans can observe. There are no radio signals, no pulses of energy, just the formation moving. But it moves in a measurable rhythm. At the European Space Data Center, an analysis team discovered something interesting. The distance between the companions changes periodically, a regular cycle that lasts exactly 57 minutes. No faster, no slower, as if the entire system were breathing in unison. A simulation was run, and the results left everyone speechless. The objects do not move independently. They react to each other. When one of them is out of place, the next one adjusts, creating a feedback loop that resembles an automatic stabilizer. It is no longer a mass of debris, but a system with reflexes. An MIT researcher remarked at the symposium, "If this were just rocks and ice, it would be the kind of rock that keeps its rhythm." The statement, while seemingly a joke, is frighteningly accurate, because in the language of physics, any system that can sustain periodic oscillations and internal responses can be considered an information system, and when motion carries information, it becomes language. Language does not need sounds, it just needs rules. Each change in distance is a letter, each cycle is a period, and the entire 3I atlas may be a long sentence, of which humans have only read the first half. When the first orbital simulations were built, everyone noticed something that puzzled everyone. The small objects around 3I atlas did not move independently, but interacted with each other in series, as if every small change in one object was immediately reflected in the next, like the reflexes of a nervous body, but in an absolute vacuum. At the California Institute of Technology, a group of celestial mechanics experts called this resonant feedback. They discovered that the system maintained dynamic equilibrium, even when subjected to solar radiation and plasma winds. There was no control center, no signals were emitted, yet the entire structure remained stable as if it had consciousness. A new concept was born: intelligent inertia, or intelligent inertia. It describes systems that maintain their state through a series of sophisticated physical reactions, without commands, without programming. If 3I atlas does indeed operate this way, it could be a form of non-biological intelligence, unknowing, unthinking, yet purposeful. An astrophysicist wrote in the conference notes, "We are used to intelligence that comes from life, but perhaps the universe creates a different kind of intelligence, one that is shaped by rules." The idea was initially considered strange, but it has become increasingly difficult to refute, as data from a variety of observatories show the same pattern of chain reactions. The 3I atlas system is like a self-regulating network, a structure that holds itself together. No one would dare call it intelligent, but everyone understands. If anything in the universe can simulate life without being alive, this is it. At first, people thought 3I atlas was being followed by a few small companions, like a swarm of asteroids traveling in the same direction. But as the data from more than a dozen observation stations were stacked, something strange began to emerge. The objects were not flying randomly through space, but were forming a regular geometry. In the three-dimensional orbital graph, the sub-objects were arranged in an open spiral, much like the logarithmic structure we see in spiral waves or galaxies. The distance between each point increased at a fixed rate, forming a pattern that was almost mathematically perfect. At Kyoto University, a team of orbital mechanics experts observed that this was no longer a moving formation, but a dynamic structure that was maintained in space, a form of living geometry where every element knew its place. and reacted to keep the whole from falling into chaos. When the pattern was projected onto a star map, it was found that the bright spots not only kept their proportions exactly, but also rotated around their main axis of motion, at a rate corresponding to a linear function, a coincidence so perfect that even the most cautious had to admit this was no longer a random set. Some physicists suggested that this orbital geometry might be how the object distributes energy, keeping the system balanced as it moves through the plasma environment of the solar wind. If so, it was not just a pretty shape, but a functional structure. And if it was functional, it had a purpose. From then on, 3I Atlas began to be viewed not as an object, but as a working device, not glowing to attract, not sending signals to talk, just moving silently. But each of its rotations creates an invisible blueprint in space, a blueprint that humans have only seen the surface of, but enough to know that, in the universe, shapes are sometimes not random, but the language of existence. In orbital science, every movement has its own rhythm. That rhythm could be a rotational period, a luminosity oscillation, or a variation in speed. But with 3I Atlas, that rhythm doesn't come from the objects themselves. It comes from the distances between them. When the time series was analyzed, the researchers noticed a periodic oscillation, very faint but distinct. The distances between the bright spots contracted and expanded in a regular cycle. The cycle repeated exactly every 2.3 hours. The strange thing was, this cycle had nothing to do with 3I Atlas's rotational rate, nor did it coincide with any magnetic oscillations in the space around it. It existed independently, like a wave of its own, the steady beat of a system operating in silence. When Fourierizing the frequencies, a peak of energy appears in the very low range, almost identical to the oscillation frequency that humans have recorded in self-tuning artificial satellites. The only difference is, 3I Atlas is billions of kilometers away from Earth. A team at the University of Geneva calls this a harmonic motion signal. No one dares to say it is a scent signal, but everyone agrees it is maintained. No oscillation in the universe can maintain such a fixed frequency unless there is an internal stabilizing mechanism. That means 3I Atlas is calibrating itself. A professor at the Tokyo Institute of Astronomy wrote in a brief report, "If motion is a form of language, this frequency is the voice of 3I Atlas. Not a greeting, not a search signal, but a breath. A regular cycle, like a system that continues to function long after its creator has left." The feeling sent shivers down the spines of many. For the first time in history, people not only saw an object fly by, but also heard its remaining life. A strange phenomenon spread through the astronomy world. From Tokyo to Paris, from Hawaii to South Africa, every observatory began to see the same thing. 3I Atlas's 2.3-hour oscillation appeared everywhere at the same time. Independent research teams were forced to merge their data because the frequency matched down to the minute. No phase shift, no delay. It was as if the entire 3I Atlas system was emitting a globally synchronized pulse, and Earth just happened to be within hearing range. Initial simulations showed that the oscillation could not be due to reflected light, nor electromagnetic interference from the sunday. The 2.3-hour frequency remained constant, regardless of changes in observation, position, angle, or time of day. At the Paranal Observatory in Chile, a team of engineers measured the phenomenon 6 times in a row, on 6 different nights, and each time, the amplitude of the oscillation was identical. an error too small to be considered a coincidence. Scientists began to view the frequency as a time marker, a kind of cosmic navigational rhythm, which could be used to determine 3I Atlas's position in space, even when it was no longer glowing. A researcher in Geneva wrote in an internal memo, "We are no longer observing light, we are listening to movement." From then on, the phrase "the pulse of 3I Atlas" became an unofficial nickname in the research community. It feels like out there, in the darkness between the stars, there is a steady breathing, slow, steady, and deliberately meant to be heard. No one knows what it means. Is it a signal or just a natural vibration? But for many, those 2.3 hours have become a period of intentional silence, a reminder that the universe is not static, but whispering by its own laws. When the 2.3-hour oscillation data were compiled globally, a team at the University of Zurich did something bold. They converted the frequency into geometry. By encoding the 3I Atlas oscillation into spatial data, they created a three-dimensional model that represented the amplitude of the oscillation over time. The result was a deafening silence. From the dry numbers, a symmetrical spiral emerged, like a giant strand of DNA slowly rotating in space. The 2.3-hour oscillation was not just a signal, but a perfect repeating pattern. Each twist corresponded to a period of oscillation, each repetition keeping the ratio of distance to speed constant, a precision that even man-made systems on Earth rarely achieve. Scientists call this structure a helical resonance field. It describes the way the energy is distributed evenly around 3I Atlas, as if the object were singing a single note and the surrounding space vibrates in time. A Cambridge astrophysicist remarked, "If anyone ever wanted to send a signal that was more stable than light, they wouldn't use radio waves. They would use geometry, because geometry doesn't need to be translated. It's the universal language of the universe, a form of notation that particles, waves, and space all understand." When the Zurich team simulated this motion in a virtual environment, they noticed a surprising phenomenon. Each time the simulation was completed, the model's helix always pointed toward the same region of space, the Sagittarius region, where the WOW signal was recorded in 1977. No one dared to draw conclusions, but the coincidence left everyone silent for a long time. If this is just a random oscillation, why does it carry a directional geometry? And why does that direction coincide with the location of the first signal ever heard from the universe? That question, though unanswered, has made 3I Atlas no longer a physical phenomenon. It has become a symbol, a phrase that does not use words, but is enough to change the way people understand the concept of interstellar communication. As scientists continued to probe 3I Atlas's 2.3-hour frequency, something unexpected happened. The frequency wasn't alone. NASA and ESA data showed that solar wind sensors, planetary magnetic fields, and even signals from satellites orbiting Earth all recorded resonances in phase with that frequency, though the amplitude was so weak that it could only be detected by stacking thousands of data frames. This phenomenon is called the Solar System Resonance Network. In other words, the 3I Atlas magnetic oscillations seem to echo through space, propagating like sound waves in the plasma ocean surrounding the planets. A plasma physicist at JPL described it in an internal report. There's no evidence that this is a wave of energy, but it's a rhythmic pattern, like an echo in a cosmic room. The universe, which had been considered static, now became dynamic and sensitive like a resonant chamber, Every vibration of 3I Atlas causes its surroundings to vibrate slightly, and in that resonance, the Earth also becomes a point in that cosmic music. A team in Paris tried to translate these vibrations into sound. When they listened back to the recording, they described a strange sensation, a deep, steady, not quite a sound, but a pulse, slow, almost like a heartbeat. A team member whispered, "We still think we're watching, but maybe we're listening to the same music that 3I Atlas is playing." Astronomers have since dubbed this phenomenon the harmonic field. 3I Atlas's harmonic field. No one knows whether it's a physical effect or a form of vibrational communication that humans don't yet understand. But everyone agrees, 3I Atlas doesn't just exist. It affects the space around it, like a musical instrument vibrates the air when it makes a sound. And in that music, the Earth, with all its telescopes, satellites, and humans, is just a small note, sounding for a brief moment, then fading away into the endless melody of the universe. After months of analysis, the observing teams realized a hard truth. Every instrument humanity has, be it ground-based telescopes, space satellites, or high-energy particle detectors, is hitting its measurement ceiling. The oscillations from 3I Atlas are so subtle, each 2.3-hour period produces only a few parts per billion in energy variation, a value so small that no human instrument can record it completely. The best data capture only the shadow of the phenomenon, the echoes, the faint ripples that remain after the main signal has passed. At NASA, the high-frequency analysis team admits that even with the most precise instrument, like James Webb, they can only see the outermost outline of the phenomenon, and the core, the thing that creates the resonance, is still beyond any measuring range. An engineer at Goddard wrote in his diary, "We can see, but we cannot touch. Every measurement is just another shadow of the same unknown." The helplessness is not just technical, but psychological, because modern science is built on measurement. And when measurement is no longer enough, the language of theory begins to fall silent. An astrophysicist at ESA commented, "We used to think that if we just had more technology, we would see everything. But perhaps the universe is not all-seeing. It shows us just enough." The flickering data lines, the fuzzy graphs, become symbols of the limits of human knowledge, not for lack of effort, but because there are phenomena designed to be beyond our ability to perceive. 3I Atlas, with its regular oscillations, becomes a mirror of that limit. It does not hide itself, but it also does not allow anyone to fully access it. And that is perhaps the deepest paradox of modern science. The clearer we look, the more darkness we see. 3I Atlas is no longer just an object in space. It has become a phenomenon of perception, a mirror to human limitations. Scientists have realized that, although it cannot be measured completely, every data collected has a strange consistency. It seems that 3I Atlas is reflecting back to humanity's own method of observation, responding with the same rhythm we are using to listen to it. The more we observe, the more we see that the distance between the object and the observer is not just space, but a distance between two levels of perception. One side uses tools to measure, the other side seems to use existence to answer. That feeling makes the entire research community silent, because for the first time in history, an alien object not only makes us question its origin, but also makes us wonder about how we see the universe. 3I Atlas does not send signals, does not send messages, but by its very movement, It has forced humans to reconsider the definition of observation. Perhaps its existence is not for communication, but to remind us that the universe is still undergoing processes that go beyond the limits of language and devices. That connection does not need waves, does not need words. It happens at a deeper level, when humans realize that they live in the same physical network, where every movement affects every other, even billions of kilometers apart. 3i Atlas, in its silence, has turned observation into dialogue, and science, which is born of doubt, suddenly finds something even rarer than answers, a feeling of being heard. Not everyone understands, but everyone feels that the universe has just answered, not by signal, but by coexistence. Throughout the history of astronomy, light has been the most faithful language of the universe. Every object is recognized by the color it emits, because color is the fingerprint of atoms. But when 3i Atlas passed through Gemini North's field of view, its light threw all familiar theories into disarray. A strange blue halo appeared around the object, dim but distinct, and lasted for more than 6 hours of observation. Conventional wisdom holds that the blue color in the comet's spectrum comes from dicarbon molecules, C2, when excited by the sun at high temperatures. But the 3i Atlas spectrum was completely empty in that range. No C2, no methane, no organic compounds that could produce that color. The light was still present, but not from any known chemical reaction. It appears to be the result of an energy emission mechanism, much like how high-tech materials reflect laser light. When the data were compared with more advanced spectroscopy equipment, something even more strange became apparent. 3i Atlas's blue light intensity increased as it moved. Not a reflection, but an active process. That led researchers to ask, is this object glowing on its own, independent of the sun, a form of cold reaction, or a previously unknown material? If the blue of Earth is the color of life, then the blue of 3i Atlas is the color of something beyond life. And perhaps, as you listen to these lines, try looking out your window or at the night around you. The light we see every night is not just from the stars, but could be from an object speaking to itself in its own spectrum. If you want to delve deeper into that mystery, please subscribe and drop a like, and join me in exploring what lies hidden within that unnatural blue light. In astronomy, the spectrum is the truest language of matter. The light passing through an object tells its own story about its element, structure, and temperature. But when 3i Atlas entered the viewing window, the light told nothing. The resulting spectrum had no features, no peaks, no valleys, just a smooth line of light, like the surface of still water. Not a trace of carbon, iron, or even ice. The entire spectrum of 3i Atlas's response was as if the light had been cleaned of all information. That has never happened before in space observations, because every object from comets to planets to galaxies leaves its own signature, a chemical script of the universe. But 3i Atlas, it was as if it had erased all its own writing. Some researchers believe this is due to perfect scattering. Light bends around the object rather than reflects back. That would only be possible if the surface of 3i Atlas was made of a material with a near-perfect refractive index, a kind of absorbing structure that human labs have only been able to create in nanoscale. There is also a more daring hypothesis. 3i Atlas does not glow in the conventional sense, but adjusts its reflection spectrum to match the cosmic background radiation. Perfect camouflage. If this is true, then 3i Atlas is hiding in the light itself, still visible, but undetectable. What has scientists baffled is not the mysterious blue color, but the way the light around it disappears without a trace. An object moves with apparent brightness, but its spectrum is blank, as if it never existed. In physics, light is evidence, but with 3I Atlas, light becomes a veil, a silence not because of lack of energy, but because someone or something is controlling every photon that leaves it. And from that moment, everyone understood that the spectrum of 3I Atlas was not something to read, but something to listen to, a space between the numbers, where the universe is trying to keep its secrets. Once the spectrum of 3I Atlas was confirmed to be empty, the next concern was not the light, but the surface, where light should reveal everything. High-resolution images from Gemini and Subaru revealed a paradox. 3I Atlas had a clear shape, but no reflectivity. Sunlight did not appear to be returning in any direction. The object was neither bright nor dark. It swallowed all light, as if covered in a material made of darkness. Compared to natural objects in the solar system, the difference was too great to be considered random. Even the blackest carbonaceous meteorites reflect at least 3% of light, but 3I Atlas almost 0%. A team at the University of Tokyo has proposed that the object is covered in a layer of super-absorbing structures, similar to the man-made materials used in optical cloaking technology. The structures could be made up of nanocavities or resonant crystal lattices, allowing light to bend around the surface rather than bounce back. If true, that would mean 3I Atlas is hiding in the very light it passes through. The first simulations suggest that this hypothetical coating acts like a reverse mirror. It doesn't reflect, but guides light around, a mechanism that makes the object invisible to direct observation, not by magic, but by precision optics. The strange thing is, even though it absorbed almost all the light that hit it, 3I Atlas's temperature did not increase. There was no sign of heat buildup or energy dissipation. In other words, it swallowed light without retaining energy, a physical behavior that cannot occur with ordinary matter. The question naturally arises, is there a kind of matter that does not reflect, does not emit, does not retain energy, just transmits light as if it had never touched it? If such a coating is real, it not only makes 3I Atlas invisible, but also blinds humans to the reality they see. After optical models failed to explain the absorbing material, scientists turned to measuring 3I Atlas's thermal radiation. The results silenced the entire observation room. The object emitted almost no infrared radiation. In physics, everything that has a temperature must radiate energy. From dust particles to ice to meteorites, EI, all radiate thermal radiation corresponding to their mass and temperature. But 3I Atlas broke that rule. The infrared thermometer recorded an emission level lower than the instrument's error, as if the object existed at absolute zero, where all atomic vibrations stop. That's impossible. No matter can reach negative 273.15 degrees Celsius in space, where the background radiation is always maintained at around 2.7 Kelvin. Yet, the data showed that 3I Atlas neither absorbed nor emitted any significant energy, a form of perfect thermal equilibrium. Thermodynamicists call this phenomenon thermal isolation, a state of complete energy isolation, as if the object were outside the reach of heat. To maintain that, it must be able to control every single oscillation at the quantum level. No one dared to say it out loud, but everyone understood. If something could control heat like that, it couldn't be a random product of nature. The absolute cold surface, the bent light, the blanked spectrum, all of it combined to create a picture of technology far beyond human understanding. There's even a theory that 3I Atlas isn't cold, but rather that it's hiding heat by bending its energy field, causing radiation to scatter in unmeasurable directions, like an invisible object, but within the realm of thermodynamics. If that hypothesis is correct, it means that 3I Atlas is not only invisible to light, but also invisible to energy, an object that exists in space, but leaves no physical evidence that it is actually there. No instrument has ever measured such a thing. No theory has ever predicted its existence. And so, the feeling spreading through the research community is no longer one of doubt, but of profound humility, that perhaps humans have just touched something that exceeds the definition of matter. During the microwave measurements earlier this month, a surprising phenomenon was observed. Whenever the observatories pointed their instruments at 3I Atlas, a weak echo appeared, delayed by about 11 seconds after the original signal. At first, it was thought to be a reflection of dust, but cross-checking between observatories showed that the delay was constant and only occurred when the instruments were pointed directly at the object. When the antennas were turned away, the echo disappeared immediately. That gave researchers pause, because in physics, reflections always depend on surface properties. But here, the surface of 3I Atlas did not reflect any light. So where did this echo come from? A power analysis showed that the echo was identical to the original signal, but the phase was reversed. A perfect echo, as if the object were sending the observer's own energy back, but inverted, like a mirror of space. Engineers call this phenomenon a retroactive echo, the back reflection effect, not a physical reflection, but a selective response, as if 3I Atlas were aware it was being measured and responding by returning a signal with a symmetrical frequency. This is not found in any natural model. No meteor, no comet, no planet can do this. It suggests a system that actively senses the surrounding energy environment, or at least a self-protective interaction mechanism. NASA's receivers tried to record the details of the echo, but each time, the echo only lasted a few seconds and then disappeared completely, like a fleeting glimpse, only present while we are looking at it, and gone as soon as we stop observing. From then on, in internal reports, 3I Atlas was given a new annotation: object reacting to observation. A quiet phrase, but enough to make everyone understand that, perhaps this time, the observer was no longer the only party watching. When the electromagnetic field measuring instruments were pointed at 3I Atlas's orbit, they discovered something no one expected. The space around the object was not empty. A region of extremely weak but stable electric charge surrounded it, extending for more than 8,000 kilometers in all directions, like an invisible membrane of energy floating in a vacuum. Its stability is what puzzled scientists most. In the turbulent solar wind, all natural electric charges fluctuate constantly, but the electrostatic field around 3I Atlas remained almost constant in intensity for days, as if it were tuned internally. Several ESA satellites that flew over the edge of the region recorded small voltage variations of about 0.0003 volts per second, very weak, but with a steady period and a clear polarity, like a slow electric current of space, flowing steadily without a source. Plasma physicists immediately recognized the unnatural nature of this phenomenon. No object in the solar system maintains a perfectly balanced electric field unless it has an automatic charge compensation mechanism. Such a mechanism, if it exists, could help the object neutralize all electronic collisions, separate itself from the plasma environment, and move without cosmic friction. 3I Atlas, then, is no longer just a flying object. It becomes a self-organizing mass of energy, a physically isolated region, in the middle of the common space that everything else must follow. Some experts compare this phenomenon to the electric field bubble in artificial plasma experiments, where energy wraps itself around itself to avoid loss. But 3I Atlas does it on a celestial scale, and without any external energy source being recorded. The feeling that has spread through the scientific community is no longer one of wonder, but of weighty silence. If 3I Atlas can indeed maintain such a stable region, it is operating on a principle beyond the thermal, electrical, and mechanical categories we know. An object that maintains a state of perfect equilibrium may be the first definition of intelligent existence in physics. After the stable electrostatic field around 3I Atlas was confirmed, radio observatories began focusing on the object itself, and this time they discovered a phenomenon never before recorded: internal oscillations in the low-frequency spectrum in the range of just a few millihertz. A regular signal appeared, so small that it could only be detected after tens of hours of continuous data accumulation. The signal did not come from the surrounding environment. It did not come from the sun, nor did it coincide with any known plasma wave. It emanated from the very center of 3I Atlas's orbit. The oscillations had a long period, about 5 hours for each complete beat. The intensity was weak, but absolutely stable. It did not disappear even when the object moved through different magnetic fields, as if this frequency was the internal rhythm of 3I Atlas. When modeling this signal on a graph, one noticed that the amplitude was not a natural sine wave, but rather a series of oscillations with a slightly modulated phase, creating a characteristic frequency pattern, a self-modulated harmonic pattern, a common feature of systems with feedback controls. This changed the entire approach. If 3I Atlas could generate its own frequency, it was not passive. It was active, and operating on a cycle that it set itself. Energy simulations showed that to maintain such a frequency, the object needed some kind of stable quantum oscillator source, independent of external heat or radiation. A system capable of self-sustaining oscillations is something that humans have only recently achieved at the microscopic level in the laboratory. So the question was no longer what is it emitting, but why is it emitting? A mechanism that maintains an internal frequency, stable down to the millihertz, can only exist if the object is designed to outlive its environment. No light, no heat, just vibration. A steady, mechanical breath, seemingly programmed to never stop. If the universe were a musical score, 3I Atlas would be the longest-lasting note, still ringing when all else has died. Time is the natural enemy of all physical systems. Energy dissipates, subatomic particles, matter wears away bit by bit as it interacts with its environment. All obey the fundamental law of the universe. Everything decays. Yet, 3I Atlas has not changed. After months of continuous monitoring, observation stations have recorded no decrease in luminosity by even 1%. The internal oscillation frequency remains exactly at 5 o'clock. No slowing, no drifting, no drifting. There is no sign of energy loss, no evidence of radiation or heat dissipation. In physics, this is almost a violation of the principle of conservation of energy over time. If a system does not decay, It means it is constantly replenishing energy, or it is operating outside the normal laws of thermodynamics. Computer models are tested to simulate this. No model could reproduce the results, no matter how much the assumptions about materials, mass, or temperature were changed. Every simulation showed that energy must gradually be lost. But 3I Atlas remained perfectly stable, like a machine that knew no wear and tear. That led to a bold hypothesis. This object could balance itself by exchanging energy directly with the quantum environment. It did not store energy, but maintained its existence through oscillations, like a bridge between nothingness and matter, continuously taking in and returning energy at the microscopic level without causing macroscopic losses. This concept is called a quantum equilibrium field. If this is true, 3I Atlas is operating according to a mechanism that current science can only dare to assume, a system that needs no fuel, no power supply, just to exist, to continue to exist. When the data were finally compiled, everything was exactly as it had been the day the object was first recorded. There was no fading, no sign of spectral weakening, as if time had no power over it. In the face of such a phenomenon, science was forced to confront the possibility that there were structures that were not meant to disappear, but to remain forever. And if that were true, 3I Atlas might not just be an object, but a principle of the universe, a demonstration that energy can hold its own when placed in the right structure. Once the energy stability of 3I Atlas was confirmed, further observations turned to determining its exact position. But it was here that a new paradox emerged. Every time the observatories located the object using radio interferometry, its coordinates fluctuated slightly, not due to errors, but in a completely regular rhythm. Every 5 hours coinciding with the internal oscillation period, the apparent position of 3I Atlas shifted by a few tens of meters and then returned to its original position. This phenomenon repeated itself like clockwork. At first, it was thought that the error was due to electromagnetic interference, but when data were collected simultaneously from several stations at different latitudes, the drift pattern appeared identical at all observation angles. This meant that the error was not in the instrument, but in the object itself. This phenomenon is called spatial phase oscillation. Another way of saying this, 3I Atlas is not fixed at a single coordinate. It oscillates between many possible locations, as if it were in a quantum superposition, but on a cosmic scale. If that is true, then the object is experiencing a form of real oscillation, where its positional states coexist and alternately manifest, not metaphorically, but a physical manifestation of the quantum principle. An object can be in many places at once, until it is observed. And the scariest thing is, every time the observatories look at 3I Atlas, the spatial oscillation pauses. Its position becomes stable, then, after the instrument stops tracking, the oscillation reappears. A pattern of behavior so precise that it cannot be considered noise, as if observation were the deciding factor in where an object exists. No one said it, but the concept of the observer effect was right before their eyes, on a scale larger than any known physical experiment. If 3I Atlas was actually oscillating between locations, it was not moving through space, but was changing its mode of existence. An object is not bound by coordinates, but simply chooses to appear where it wants, at the moment it needs. From there, researchers were forced to reconsider the concept of interstellar objects. Maybe 3I Atlas is not passing through the solar system, but is simultaneously present in it. and somewhere else where humans cannot see it. In a universe that is thought to be static, this object seems to be the first evidence of a kind of existence that transcends the concept of space-time. Once the energy stability of 3I Atlas was confirmed, further observations turned to determining its exact position. But it was here that a new paradox emerged. Every time the observatories located the object using radio interferometry, its coordinates fluctuated slightly, not due to errors, but in a completely regular rhythm, every 5 hours coinciding with the internal oscillation period. The apparent position of 3I Atlas shifted by a few tens of meters and then returned to its original position. This phenomenon repeated itself like clockwork. At first, it was thought that the error was due to electromagnetic interference, but when data were collected simultaneously from several stations at different latitudes, the drift pattern appeared identical at all observation angles. This meant that the error was not in the instrument, but in the object itself. This phenomenon is called spatial phase oscillation. Another way of saying this, 3I Atlas is not fixed at a single coordinate. It oscillates between many possible locations, as if it were in a quantum superposition, but on a cosmic scale. If that is true, then the object is experiencing a form of real oscillation where its positional states coexist and alternately manifest, not metaphorically, but a physical manifestation of the quantum principle. An object can be in many places at once until it is observed. And the scariest thing is, every time the observatories look at 3I Atlas, the spatial oscillation pauses, its position becomes stable. Then after the instrument stops tracking, the oscillation reappears, a pattern of behavior so precise that it cannot be considered noise, as if observation were the deciding factor in where an object exists. No one said it, but the concept of the observer effect was right before their eyes, on a scale larger than any known physics experiment. If 3I Atlas was actually oscillating between locations, it was not moving through space, but changing its mode of existence. An object is not bound by coordinates, but simply chooses to appear where it wants, at the moment it needs. From there, researchers were forced to rethink the concept of interstellar objects. Maybe 3I Atlas is not passing through the solar system, but is simultaneously present in it, and somewhere else where humans cannot see it, in a universe that seemed static. When the data finally pieced together, a picture emerged, and in that picture, 3I Atlas's blue light was no longer an optical phenomenon, but a form of language. From its perfectly flat spectrum, perfectly absorbing surfaces, near absolute temperature, to its internal oscillations and open quantum states, every piece of the puzzle pointed to the same thing. 3I Atlas did not react to its environment like ordinary matter. It actively interacted, and every reaction was intentional. The blue light, when decoded through thousands of hours of data, turned out to be anything but monotonous. It oscillated slightly, periodically, and changed in intensity according to Earth's position in orbit. In other words, 3I Atlas knew it was being observed and responded by converting the light into a signal. Scientists call this phenomenon photonic modulation, not random emission, but a series of variations maintained precisely over time. A message encoded not in letters or sounds, but in the way light itself changes. If true, then that blue light is the most basic form of communication for conscious matter, directed to no one, without language, only rhythm, a music written in photons, where each oscillation is a sentence, each change in intensity a period. It could be the way the universe talks to itself, a wordless dialogue between structures that know how to exist and maintain order in chaos. And perhaps, in the moment, scientists saw the halo. They were not just observing an interstellar object, but were being listened to by something too ancient, too subtle, and too patient to exist simply to be noticed. The blue light of 3I Atlas, in its silence, became proof that matter can learn to speak, and that the universe, when old enough, will learn to whisper with its own energy. This object seemed to be the first demonstration of a kind of existence beyond the concept of space-time. In the first image from Gemini North, 3I Atlas looked like a solid body, an ancient rock polished by millions of years of travel. But when the radar data was processed, the first thing that collapsed was that assumption. Inside 3I Atlas, there was no mass density corresponding to the volume. Radar signals passing through the object showed unusually weak reflections, like waves passing through a hollow space. Gravity measurements showed that its pull was only a fraction of its original estimated mass. Put simply, the object looked huge, but it was almost hollow. This phenomenon is not new in the universe. Many comets and asteroids are porous, with low densities due to their formation from icy dust. But 3I Atlas is different. Its hollowness is almost absolute. There is no massive core, no stratification, and no concentration of mass that could explain its stable orbit. This leaves only two possibilities. Either 3I Atlas is a hollow mass reinforced to withstand external forces, or it does not need a core to maintain its shape. Both are beyond the known natural model. When simulating the structure of the object, researchers discovered a strange phenomenon. Low-frequency vibrations from the core are not absorbed, but are reflected through the many layers inside, as in a cavity. A cavity, but not static. It acts like an acoustic resonator, where the energy waves do not dissipate but rather self-sustain the feedback loop. If that is true, then 3I Atlas could be designed as an engineering structure, a giant resonator that uses its very hollowness to exist stably in space. A natural object doesn't need to be designed like that, but one that's built to last for millions of years, maybe it does. Hollow isn't empty. Hollow, in this case, is a calculated structure. As 3I Atlas approaches Mars, it enters the direct path of a solar storm. Sun-watching observatories detect a massive coronal mass ejection, CME. 1 billion tons of plasma heated to millions of degrees is being flung into space at millions of miles per hour. This is no gentle solar wind. This is a wall of radiation and magnetic fields swirling like a cosmic tsunami. Scientists calculate the trajectory of the storm. It will hit 3I Atlas. This was an absolute test. The models all agreed on one result: destruction. A hollow or porous structure like a fairy comet should have been torn apart by the sheer force of the magnetic field. The heat should have vaporized it in an instant. The pressure of the storm should have pushed it seriously off course. Even a hollow engineering structure would be in extreme danger without some kind of active energy shield. The radio telescopes temporarily lost track of it in the noise of the storm. Everyone waited. When the storm passed after many hours of silence, the observatories reacquired the target. 3I Atlas was still there. It was still intact. It was almost completely unaffected. Its orbit oscillated only slightly, almost negligibly, from an impact that should have blown it out of the solar system. The blue light dimmed only momentarily, then stabilized again. The CME event had not destroyed 3I Atlas. It only proved one thing: that structure as light as air was somehow more durable than solid steel. It had survived a test that no natural object should have been able to overcome. Survival is an irrefutable result. It has been observed. It has been confirmed. This forces scientists to confront a conclusion they have been avoiding. The fairy comet model has collapsed. No natural structure, however fragile or solid, can account for both observations. A density as light as air and a strength surpassing that of solid steel. Those two properties are absolute contradictions in natural physics. Something cannot be both porous and indestructible, unless the structure is strong not because of its material, but because of its design. This possibility opens up the possibility that objects may be designed rather than naturally formed. This is a line that science has always been reluctant to cross, the line between phenomenon and intention. A designed structure means there is a designer, an object that is both hollow and indestructible, an object that suggests intentional design. Now, we will observe another phenomenon. A phenomenon that is not about its shape, but about its breadth. NASA's Swift Space Observatory was not designed to hunt comets. It was designed to hunt gamma-ray bursts, the most violent events in the universe. It can detect the most subtle energy changes. When Swift pointed its ultraviolet sensor at 3I Atlas, it was looking for a signature of water. It found it. It discovered that 3I Atlas was spewing a giant cloud of water vapor. This is normal for comets, but there was a problem with location. 3I Atlas was found to be operating at a distance of 3 AU from the Sunday. It was too far away. In that cold region of space, the sun's light was too weak. It's not hot enough to sublimate the H2O ice to comets. Comets usually only wake up when they cross the ice line near Mars's orbit. 3I Atlas has started to work too early. It's breathing in an environment that should keep it completely frozen. What's even more bizarre than the early outgassing is its speed. The logic of comets is simple. As a comet gets closer to the sun, heat increases. As it moves farther away, heat decreases. Trangassing drops rapidly. The behavior of a comet always varies wildly with temperature. But data from Swift and other observatories paint an impossible picture. 3I Atlas's outgassing rate is unusually steady. It doesn't change as it gets closer to the Sunday. It doesn't decrease as it moves through different radiation zones. It spews out steam at a steady, almost mechanically controlled rate. It's more like a kettle being steadily boiled by a constant power source, rather than an iceberg being heated erratically by the Sunday. At a distance of more than 3 astronomical units where sunlight is too weak to melt any ice, 3I Atlas began emitting steam again, not in random bursts like a comet, but a steady stream, maintaining its intensity for weeks. It spewed steam at a steady, almost mechanically controlled rate, like a kettle of water boiling steadily, plugged into a constant power source, not an iceberg being erratically melted by the Sunday. Every measurement showed one thing. The amount of steam was independent of the ambient temperature. As the object got closer to the sun, the rate of evaporation did not increase. As it moved away, it did not decrease. It stayed the same, an unnaturally constant value, as if some internal mechanism was controlling the pressure, algorithmically adjusting the rate of evaporation. This cannot happen with a natural comet. In all thermodynamic models, the evaporation of ice depends directly on the energy received from solar radiation. But 3I Atlas does not follow that rule. It acts as a self-contained energy system, Some experts compare this behavior to the pressure regulator in a heat engine, where the steam is maintained at a steady state to produce work efficiently. If that hypothesis is correct, then 3I Atlas does not just radiate energy, it operates energy. The question is no longer why is there steam, but how is it controlled to such a perfect degree? And from there, the hypothesis of an internal technical mechanism begins to emerge. Measurements from NASA's Swift satellite show that when 3I Atlas began ejecting water vapor, its surface temperature was still below 200 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, water cannot exist as a liquid or gas. Yet, spectrometers consistently recorded a steady 88 pounds of water vapor escaping every second, a steady, unabated rate. This defies the logic of thermodynamics. For water to evaporate, heat is needed. But here, the vapor was created in conditions so cold that the molecules should have been stationary. This phenomenon could only happen if the energy came from within, not from the sunday, a form of energy that does not create heat, but is enough to break the bonds between water molecules. Physicists tentatively call this hypothesis cold excitation, a mechanism in which energy is transferred to matter through low-level electromagnetic oscillations, creating a phase transition without increasing the temperature. It is no longer evaporation, but a deliberate release. If true, 3I Atlas is not simply a melting block of ice, but a self-regulating energy system with the ability to generate steam from a state of absolute solidity. This mechanism, if understood by humanity, would change the entire way humans think about energy in the universe. No longer dependent on heat, no need for combustion or chemical reactions. Just stimulate the oscillations, and matter itself splits into usable energy. What is even more remarkable is that this steady rate of evaporation not only creates a jet, but also keeps the orbit of 3I Atlas perfectly balanced. Each puff of steam seemed to be calculated to not deflect the motion, like a self-balancing propulsion system. If this phenomenon is real, then 3I Atlas is doing what humans have only simulated in theory, generating energy from cold, not glowing, not heating, just silently exhaling regular puffs of steam, like an ancient machine still running in the darkness of space and never stopping. One of the biggest paradoxes of 3I Atlas is that it continuously releases water vapor without structural breakdown. According to all natural comet models, such a prolonged outgassing process would cause the core to become unbalanced, causing cracks, ruptures, or at least deformations. But 3I Atlas keeps its shape intact, and the outgassing rate does not change by even a thousandth. When comparing data from different observatories, it is realized that the vapor pressure inside the object is absolutely stable. There are no fluctuations, no cycles of increase and decrease. The amount of vapor released per unit of time always maintains a precise value, not a natural balance, but a fine-tuned balance. This phenomenon has led scientists to hypothesize that inside 3I Atlas there may be an internal channel network, like a system of valves or pipes, that distributes pressure evenly throughout the entire hollow mass inside. That explains why, despite continuous injection, no area of the object is subjected to local forces strong enough to cause collapse. When simulated with fluid mechanics software, the results show that the model can be stable if there are interconnected chambers with a symmetrical structure. That is, 3I Atlas can act as a closed pressure regulator, keeping the internal energy at an absolute balance. That stability is what puzzles experts the most. No celestial body has naturally achieved such a balance for a long time. To sustain itself, it must constantly sense the pressure at every point and adjust itself on the fly, a behavior that is identical to a machine's feedback mechanism. This opens up a possibility never before mentioned in astronomy. 3. Atlas is not just a hollow object that generates energy, but also a giant pressurized system, operating on principles that human engineering has only applied on a laboratory scale. An object that knows how to maintain pressure means it knows how to maintain its own survival, not exploding, not disintegrating, just maintaining balance like a giant body that knows how to breathe in silence. And perhaps that is the reason it can survive for millions of years in space, because it does not fight the environment, but adjusts to blend with it. As the observatories analyzed the data in more detail, a clear pattern emerged. 3. Atlas's water vapor flow was not completely continuous, but was broken into regular intervals, each lasting exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes. There was no error. There was no variation. Each time the vapor reached its peak intensity, it subsided for a few minutes, then increased again with the same amplitude. A perfect cycle, like a clock keeping time by pressure. Such a phenomenon had never been recorded in astronomy. Natural comets spew vapor in irregular patterns, depending on their rotation, angle of illumination, and thermal intensity. But 3I Atlas was different. It spewed vapor evenly, regardless of its position in the orbit, as if an internal controller was keeping the entire process in rhythm. When the signals were compared between stations in the two hemispheres, the pressure fluctuations still appeared in phase, implying that this was a global phenomenon in the structure of the object, rather than a local operation from a single point. The hypothesis quickly emerged. There might be a central oscillating core inside 3I Atlas, which pulses regularly to control the pressure in the vent channels. If true, it would not be a hollow object, but a self-operating system with an endogenous rhythm. Physicists call it a hydrothermal oscillator. But in this case, there is no heat, no liquid water, only vapor maintained in absolute balance. When the periodic diagram was drawn, many people were stunned by the precision. The error is only 0.00002 seconds after dozens of consecutive injections, a stability only found in artificial atomic clocks on Earth. No one can call it random, because randomness cannot be that precise. 3I Atlas seems to be measuring time by its own mechanism of existence. Each injection is a heartbeat, each cycle is a minute of the system passing, a cosmic clock without gears, only steam and the silence of space to mark time. If this is a sign of design, it is not made for humans to see, but for the universe to remember. When dynamic models were run on months of data, a surprising discovery emerged. 3I Atlas's jets were asymmetrical. They were aligned at small angles just a few degrees, but enough to create a gentle, steady, and directional thrust. In orbital physics, a small change in the direction of the jet can alter an object's entire trajectory. Those tiny deviations, when calculated over long periods of time, make up the absurdly precise trajectory of 3I Atlas. No yaw, no twist, no drift. That can't be random. If an object maintains its direction of travel with steady jets, it is steering. Some dynamicists call this microjet propulsion, a natural micropropulsion system, but in this case, every data suggests it is a coordinated system. Each jet of steam is not spewing randomly, but is turned on and off at its own pace, working together like a small engine, working together to maintain equilibrium in space. Energy simulations show that if 3I Atlas does indeed use steam to steer, it would require only a tiny amount of energy, but enough to maintain a stable orbit for thousands of years. No comet has ever exhibited this behavior. Only man-made probes use similar methods to self-balance on interplanetary journeys. What has stunned researchers is the precision of the jet distribution. Each jet generates a counter thrust equal to the amount of energy lost from the steam, keeping the entire object from being off-center by even a millionth of a degree. It's a fine-tuning that even quantum mechanics would bow to. Because to achieve that level of stability, there must be a continuous feedback system, a brain in the technical sense, without consciousness, but capable of calculating and reacting in real time. When the models are projected on screen, the trajectory of 3I Atlas appears as smooth as a mathematical curve, so precise that humans could not create it based on inertia alone. If it is a comet, it is the only comet that can steer itself. If it is not, then perhaps 3I Atlas is the first prototype of a steam-powered deep space propulsion system, a propulsion mechanism that requires no fuel, requiring only absolute physical stability. And in the silence of the universe, it still flies. Not fast, not slow, just precisely, as if every molecule of vapor escaping knows its own direction. When steam becomes a space balancer, in the vastness of space, where even the smallest force can cause a trajectory to deviate, the 3I Atlas propulsion system's exhaust stream is more than just a thruster. It opens up a new possibility. The steam acts as a regulator, a very light but steady touch between the spacecraft and its environment. When the steam is released at low to moderate power, it creates delicate pressure gradients around the spacecraft. These streams sweep across, interact with the tiny particles in microscopic plasma, and according to simulations, they have the ability to smooth out orbital oscillations, reducing the amplitude of the oscillations and stabilizing the spin axis. In test models, the amplitude of the oscillations can be reduced by 30 to 40% after just a few adjustment cycles. Thus, the steam not only propels the ship forward, but also helps it maintain balance among the invisible forces of space. The nozzle system and the control algorithm, when coupled with the steam flow, turn each small pulse into a precise stabilizing tool. If successfully tested, this would be a major breakthrough. Instead of using powerful fuels to push, we could use the steam as the breath of balance, gently but effectively. Mastering the smallest piece sometimes brings the greatest stability. 3I Atlas carries no engines, no guidance systems, and no control circuits. Yet, it self-regulates. In the latest simulations, the streams of water vapor escaping from cracks in the ice surface appear to be more than just the result of solar heating. They behave in a regular manner, found in surprisingly recurring cycles. In each cycle, the direction and intensity of the vapor escape create a small reaction force, just enough to keep 3I Atlas's axis of rotation from drifting and to minimize orbital fluctuations due to gravitational interactions with the Sunday. An object drifting through space, yet with an internal stabilizing mechanism, as if by design. This has astronomers wondering, is this a quirk of physics or a natural evolution of interstellar icy bodies? Matter that knows how to balance itself to survive the endless journey? If so, then water vapor, something seemingly fragile, could be the key to the stability of the universe, not by force, but by a delicate balance between melting and evaporation, between light and darkness, between movement and stillness. 3i Atlas, perhaps, is not just moving, but maintaining an ancient balance, a dance between gravity and its own breath. When the NASA SWIFT team analyzed the light reflection spectrum from 3i Atlas, they discovered something unlike any other comet ever recorded. The object's surface not only reflected light weakly, but also showed bands of rare metals, including nickel, titanium, and a type of reflective nanostructure, something that is difficult to form naturally at such a large scale. Some scientists have suggested that it could be the remnants of an artificial thermal shield, or a layer of super-strong composite materials designed to endure millions of years in the cold of space. More remarkably, the data also showed a periodic pattern of reflections, as if there were flat surfaces or uniform edges rotating on their axis. This phenomenon is similar to the reflection of metal, when a man-made object rotates slowly in the sun's weak light. If these analyses are confirmed, 3i Atlas may not be just an icy flying rock, but a purpose-built structure, perhaps a probe, or part of an ancient cosmic engineering, drifting silently through the solar system, carrying secrets beyond human imagination. At first, the engineers thought it was geostationary satellite interference, but no, the frequency did not match any artificial source on Earth. The signal had a three-layer structure, a steady low-frequency oscillation background, a series of pulses that repeated exactly 19.6 seconds apart, and on top, a high-frequency noise band that varied according to the position of 3i Atlas. Strangely, as the object slowly rotated on its axis, the signal intensity also oscillated in a spiral pattern, as if it were scanning the space around it. Astrophysicists call this the reverse radar effect. But analysis of the data showed that the signal was directional and appeared to be deliberately tuned to keep the frequency stable. A bold hypothesis was put forward. It was not a random signal, but a waveform carrying energy, helping 3i Atlas maintain its artificial heat transfer mechanism. Or worse, or more interestingly, it was the automated communication system of a sleeping device. When the data from the 3 different observatories were overlaid, a repeating pattern resembling ancient Morse code pulses emerged. It carried no clear message, but enough to raise the question: have we just encountered the first signal from a non-human construct? NASA did not comment, but internally, researchers referred to this episode as the Whisper of Atlas. Just hours after the last signal was recorded, all of NASA SWIFT's tracking systems suddenly went silent. No pulses, no oscillations, no background noise. The frequency that had been full of life now flat as the last heartbeat on an electrocardiogram. At first glance, it looked like 3i Atlas had simply drifted out of range. But when scientists checked its position, the object was still clearly within range. A team of engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory hypothesized it's possible that 3i Atlas's emission system had been turned off immediately after it detected that it was being tracked. The coincidence sent chills down many people's spines, because according to the internal energy model, the object was still operating stably. Its temperature and exhaust flow had not decreased at all, which meant it was still alive, just silent. A defense mechanism, or a pre-programmed routine that, when detected, it would hide and cut off all communication. Scientists couldn't say for sure, But there was one small detail that had been overlooked until the Caltech team reprocessed the radio data using a noise-amplifying algorithm. In the midst of that silence, hidden deep in the low-frequency layer, they detected an extremely thin oscillation, 0.0003 hertzes, a beat so slow that humans barely sensed it. And every time it appeared, the spectral data around 3I Atlas changed slightly, like a breath. Thus, a new phrase was written into NASA's internal report. Atlas is breathing. Atlas is breathing. When NASA released the final data from 3I Atlas, everyone thought the story was over. An object escaping steam at an unusually long distance, with a constant temperature, was enough to force physics models to be updated. But then, while scientists were still debating the mechanism of this unnatural heat transfer, an independent team in Chile discovered something even more unusual. In images captured by Gemini North, faint dots of light appeared next to 3I Atlas. At first glance, everyone thought it was just optical noise, but when compared with the VLT data in Europe, the dots were still there and moving. They weren't drifting freely like cosmic dust. They weren't spinning around like debris. Instead, they were moving in the same direction, at the same speed, keeping almost perfectly apart. At this point, every eye in the control room was glued to the monitor. A young physicist whispered, "They're flying in formation." That statement silenced the air. No one dared to confirm, but the general feeling was 3I Atlas was not alone. Doppler measurements confirmed the surprise. The relative velocities of these small objects were synchronized to a difference of less than 0.02%. No natural system had ever recorded such a difference. An ESA expert whispered in a closed meeting, "If a star can control the orbits of planets, what is controlling these objects?" No one answered, but it is clear. If 3I Atlas does indeed possess an artificial power system, as the previous chapter suggested, then it is highly likely it is not just a solitary machine, but part of a network, a formation programmed to move through star systems. Michio Kaku calls this intelligent swarming model, a structure that can self-adjust to avoid collisions, maintain distance, and optimize energy when crossing changing gravity environments. He says, "Nothing in nature moves with such precision, unless it is programmed." That statement opens a whole new chapter, where 3I Atlas is no longer a solitary phenomenon, but becomes the first link. In an interstellar formation, a question has been raised in the scientific community. If we are observing the formation of an artificial system, who is in command? When the team compared the orbital data, everything was too perfect. The objects kept a fixed distance, moving in smooth arcs around the sun, as if programmed to maintain that order. There was no wobble, no significant error. Even with the influence of the sun's magnetic field, the deviations were within limits that the instruments barely noticed. A JPL astronomer said, "It can't be random. If it's natural, it's operating on rules we've never seen before." NASA calls the phenomenon unknown orbital resonance, but Michio Kaku uses a different word, conscious precision. He says there are only two possibilities. One, this is a new physical phenomenon, beyond human understanding. Two, it was a product of intelligence, a structure that maintained its position in space. Subsequent VLT data reinforced the suspicion. Small objects moving in cycles that coincided with slight fluctuations in 3I Atlas's exhaust, as if there was an invisible connection between them. A collective control system? or a synchronization signal emitted from the center of 3I Atlas. No one knew for sure. Only one thing was clear. This was not chaotic motion. It was an orderly formation, stabilized by a mechanism beyond the current understanding of physics. When the Gemini and VLT data were pieced together, one thing struck the team. The formation had not changed. For more than 3 months, the objects had remained relatively constant, as if bound by an invisible string. There was no sign of decay. No object had drifted out of alignment. Everything was cyclical, so precise that it had paused the entire astronomical model. Some scientists called it a strange gravitational resonance. But if gravity alone were the case, the system would have fallen apart long ago. That meant there had to be some other mechanism, a regulating force that kept everything in orbit. Michio Kaku put it succinctly: no natural system maintains absolute stability over time unless it was designed to do so. And from this, a new hypothesis was born, that 3I Atlas might not just be a power center, but a coordinator for the entire formation, no longer a mere foreign object. It became the brains of a moving interstellar network. After hundreds of hours of observation, a new discovery put all theories to rest. When the Caltech team processed the radio data, they realized that the objects in the formation were emitting oscillations at the same frequency. Not strong, just small pulses, but with periods that matched almost perfectly. At first, people thought it was background noise, but when the signal was cleaned up, the cycles repeated in a clear pattern, a common rhythm, like a heartbeat that rippled through many different bodies. Bi Atlas seemed to be at the center of the pulse train. Each time it let out a breath, a slight oscillation appeared, and within seconds, all the surrounding objects responded in sync. There was no random delay, no frequency drift. Everything was happening like a real-time network. One researcher commented, "They're not just flying together, they're talking to each other." NASA won't confirm, but the frequency record is hidden in a public data appendix, a sign that they may have seen more than what's been released. From the data, everyone knew something was off. The objects weren't just moving together. They were in formation, responding to the same frequency, and keeping a steady rhythm for months on end. No one dared to say for sure. But in a rare interview, Michio Kaku looked into the camera and said slowly, "Are we witnessing an interstellar convoy?" The question cut through the air. No one laughed. No one objected. Because the data didn't deny the possibility. If 3I Atlas was the power center, and the surrounding objects were mobile satellites, then the whole system could be an interstellar travel structure, designed to move between solar systems without direct contact. Another, more daring hypothesis. It could be a probe formation, each object carrying its own mission, collecting, transmitting data, and synchronizing itself via energy waves. No one knows what they're really doing, but the more we look at the orbits, the more it becomes clear that what we're seeing is no longer in the realm of natural phenomena. An ESA expert wrote in a confidential report, "We can't call this a comet. We can't call this a spacecraft. This is somewhere in between." And from that moment, 3I Atlas became more than just an object. It became a symbol of a larger question. Is the universe about to show us that we've never really been alone? Independent research groups submitted reports, but NASA, ESA, all kept quiet. No counter-arguments, no confirmations, just a string of unanswered emails. An ESO researcher whispered at the conference, "It seems they know something, but they can't say." Internally, Some data were withdrawn from public access. The official reason, recalibration of the photometers. But the scientific community understood. It was just a mask for another decision. A decision to keep quiet. Michio Kaku calls this systematic fear, because whenever humanity faces something beyond its understanding, the first instinct is not to explore, but to hide. He said, "We did it with Galileo, with Oumuamua, and now with 3i Atlas." The world watched, waiting for an explanation, but only received a long silence. That silence, not a void, but a signal, another way of saying, "We are not ready." At that moment, everything seemed to stop. The telescopes were still pointed, but no one was talking about 3i Atlas anymore. The conversation was drowned out by safer topics. New stars, supernova explosions, newspapers that no longer mentioned interstellar formations. But in small labs, many people were still quietly watching. The data were still being stored. The little pulses were still appearing at the same frequency. And then one day, when NASA stopped issuing updated orbital maps, a familiar feeling permeated the air, a feeling that history had brought. One of the observers wrote in his diary, "I don't know what I'm seeing, but I know they're trying to forget it." It wasn't a matter of science. It was a matter of belief. Once again, humans are faced with the inexplicable, and instead of moving closer, we retreat. That moment is the boundary between knowing and accepting, between truth and silence. At first, it was all just a test to measure the magnetic field signal, a familiar operation, repeated thousands of times over years of research. But this time, the screen did not display the usual results. Instead of a random stream of data, a pattern appeared, clear, orderly, and conscious. The team thought the machine was faulty. They rebooted the entire system, replaced the power supply and the processor chip. But the pattern still appeared, except it was watching them. A small waveform oscillated with each heartbeat of the operator. The longer they looked, the clearer it became. This was not a response from the device, but an entity responding to the human on the other side of the screen. At that moment, the lab fell into absolute silence. No one said it, but they all felt the same thing. They had just touched something science was not supposed to see. After the signal was recorded, the data transmission back to the center was cut off midway. No warning, no system error, just gone. An engineer thought the transmission was jammed, but when they checked the satellite logs, everything was abnormally perfect. The ionospheric layer, the layer of the atmosphere that normally allows radio signals to pass through, suddenly developed a blind zone that lasted 47 seconds. During that time, no signal could get through. It wasn't a magnetic storm. It wasn't aurora interference. It was like someone put an invisible shield in the middle of the sky. A data security expert joked, "It seems like someone on the other side doesn't want us to share this discovery." The room was silent. No one laughed.